Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential, your weekly look at all things royal, brought to you by the Daily Mail. I'm Jo Elvin and I just have one guest today, but it's the only one that matters. What a guest she is, the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English. Thank you for being here.
This feels a bit like Frost Nixon, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, which one's which?
Maybe Paxman Titchmarsh.
Oh, gosh, which one of those do you think I look like?
Well, you know what I think you look like today, Jo.
Thank you very much, yes. But Rebecca, on to serious things. It's been a week since the final episodes of the Harry and Meghan docuseries aired on Netflix. And what do you think has been the impact on the rest of the royal family?
Well, I know they're very privately very hurt, angry in William's case about some of the things that's been said, but they made a really conscious decision, all of them together, to not respond, to not get bogged down on this. They've got a busy end of the year and to just keep calm and carry on, basically. Their feeling is, what do we have to gain by engaging in this constant tit-for-tatting? You said that, I didn't say that, you did that, I didn't that. It just doesn't help anyone. And, let's just hope that they get things what they want to do off their chest and we can move on.
Have you got any intel whatsoever? This is a cheeky question. I think
I'm worried, Jo, that look on your face.
Me, one of the standouts of the series was Harry holding up his phone, having just had a text drop from William. I mean, what must the WhatsApp chats be like? Yeah.
Well, there are WhatsApp groups, and the fact that they're even corresponding by text and not phone call, I think it's actually really sad. You've got to take an opinion on whether the text literally did just drop then or was it kind of hammed up for the cameras. But it's a very sad situation when two brothers aren't even talking, and that's how they communicate nowadays, if at all.
Well, we've seen two traditional events over the past week carry on, sort of like keeping calm and carry on. The carol service and the lunch at Windsor. What happened at those? What can you tell us?
Well, the carol service, first of all, actually is becoming a traditional event. It's the second year that the Princess of Wales has held it, and it's together at Christmas. And it's a really lovely event. It's carols, it's family, it's about celebrating community. And then this year there was an extra kind of added theme about getting people together to remember the late Queen and her legacy.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, obviously the timing was slightly unfortunate because it's long planned and was held on the day that the second tranche of Netflix stuff came out. But actually, I suppose it did give the family a chance to show some unity against the kind of brickbats that are being thrown at them. So the King was there, the Queen Consort, all the family and friends. So I think it was quite a nice touch for them to be able to do that. But as I say, that their kind of appearance there was very, very long planned. But, it was timely.
The Christmas spirit will battle on, I think. But and tell us this development overnight about something to do with the royal colonel titles.
Yeah, so we had to sit on that for a little bit, but it was announced late last night. So there's been a little bit of a shake-up's too strong a word, a little bit of a kind of moving around of positions of royals who hold the title of colonel with the household division regiments. The King is always Colonel-in-Chief, but you have a member of the royal family as Colonel. And it obviously emphasises the family's link with the military, because obviously the King is the Commander-in-Chief and everything they do is for King and country. So what's really interesting about this is you've got the Queen Consort now taking over as Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. And obviously the last person to hold that post was Prince Andrew, who clung on to them for kind of grim death as long as he could, but the Queen eventually stripped him off those posts after he settled the Epstein case. So you've got that, and I think that's quite a clever move by the King, because of course the Queen Consort is the most senior woman in the royal family, so Andrew can't really gripe about that. And then obviously
Someone tells me he might.
Well, yeah, but I think it's quite clever. He can't really start moaning about the King's wife and the Queen Consort. And then you've also got Colonel Kate now, so the Princess of Wales is now Colonel of the Irish Guards, and that's something she's been associated with for quite a few years, because William previously held the position and she would go with him every St Patrick's Day and hand out sprigs of shamrock. So now she's going to be doing that in her own right, and William has moved to the Welsh Guards because obviously he's now Prince of Wales. So it's a bit of moving around rather than a drastic shake-up, but interesting.
It's fascinating. What are the accoutrements with this? Do we get a uniform? Do we get military badges?
Well, I was really hoping that. So I asked that question of the palace yesterday, and because obviously you see some members of the royal family and their colonel roles as colonels taking part on horseback in trooping the colour, which is what this is all leading up to. The King's first trooping the colour in June, but the Queen Consort, the Princess of Wales, won't be wearing uniforms, so they'll just be wearing kind of regal military themed outfits, and you won't see them in horseback. But these are roles the royals take very seriously, so it will prompt a lifelong association with that regiment. And I know, certainly from Camilla's point of view, behind the scenes, she's always sending them kind of bottles of whiskey when they come back off tour, and writing letters, and taking a great interest in welfare issues. So I presume that will continue with these new roles as well.
Now, while all of that has been going on, and they're sort of trying as much as possible to carry on business as usual, there have been reports that Harry wants a summit. Another one. Will he get it? So
Harry's team, who apparently never briefed to the media on...
Just not your meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm quite glad about that, I think, nowadays. It was briefed to the Sunday Times at the weekend that he feels that he should be able to sit down and thrash through his issues with the family. He mentioned, of course, in the Netflix documentary that he'd come to terms with the fact that he would never have an apology for his family or any kind of settlement. But of course, you've got to ask yourself, what does he feel they have to apologise for, and do they feel they owe him an apology? I mean, I do think there has been a mishandling of the situation on both respects. I mean, Buckingham Palace definitely did bend over backwards to help him. I know that. I saw that with my own eyes throughout the whole process. But of course they do it in their own funny little way, and that probably wasn't enough for Harry and Meghan. So I think there probably is, a cause for reflection on both sides, but an apology, I mean, I don't think the family feel that.
I think it's interesting that, on one hand, we're upset with all of this information being sort of like disseminated about us by the palace or not by the palace, and yet on the other hand, we want, all this sort of like privacy, and I just don't understand why does he not want to do this privately, any of it?
Well, I think this is the $64,000 question out of all of this. By doing the Netflix chat, I mean, putting the money to one side, and clearly they've got to do this as part of this mega bucks deal, what does he hope to achieve by it? He could talk about what's happened to him and how unhappy he was, but there was a lot of kind of below-the-belt jabs at the royal family. I was effectively the only man that ever married for love rather than, a woman fitting the mould.
The only one who's existed outside the bubble.
Yeah, there were a lot of quite low blows, I think, that actually Harry didn't need to say. Stick to the facts, and then maybe you will find a way of, if you feel this is the only way that you can express your opinion in full to the family, maybe this is the channel that he feels most comfortable with. But then those jabs, I think, make it even more difficult for them to respond in kind to him. So,
and speaking of response, there was a quote in the Sunday Times from a friend of the Duke of Sussex that Harry is on a quote-unquote a true quest to force the family to change. So for all the hopes the royals might have that this will eventually die down, that doesn't feel like that's the case.
He may say that, or his friends may say that, but it's up to the family as to whether they want to engage with that. And if they don't, and they refuse to publicly comment, then where is he left? It's this kind of constant cycle of harking back to the past instead of just moving forward with optimism for the future, which is, I think, what everybody wants him to do. And we've still got the book coming, Spare, 10th of January. And there are reports suggesting that the book will be far more explosive than the Netflix documentary. Well, Netflix will be pleased about that, won't they? But, I mean, if that's true, do you have any idea what that might be and whether or not that could be the thing that breaks the King's silence on all of this? Well, we fully expect it, because obviously Harry himself has said he's writing this book not as the prince he was born, but the man he's become. Make of that what you will, but it seems to suggest that he will be harking a lot on his childhood experiences, and undoubtedly they weren't good. He clearly had, a very, especially after his mother died, a very emotionally unstable childhood that has an effect on him today. But of course, in talking about this, there are going to be implicit criticisms or explicit criticisms, as I think probably the guess is, of his father and the way he handled things. And again, you know, the king has made a very conscious decision that this is his son, he loves him, he's not going to respond, the door is always there and it's open for him. But you've got to ask yourself how much one man can take. I think it would take a lot for the palace to comment on. They are definitely keeping their powder dry. They want to see what Harry has got to say. But again, it goes back to this point, someone I discussed it with the other week, is they just don't see how it helps being drawn into a constant tit-for-tat with Harry over this.
Well, let's hear some of your comments now, and understandably, most were about the Harry and Meghan series. On the subject, the Sussexes could have moved to South Africa. Mary Vincent writes, I am a South African and I am delighted that they did not come to SA. Don't need victims here, we need positive people. Gosh, strong words, thank you for that. Keeping things international. Here's a comment from Israel now. Callie Mitchell says, I'm an American Israeli living in Israel and I look forward to your show every week. Well, thank you very much. About press officers leaking and planting stories, Prince Harry made this Netflix claim. I'd far rather get destroyed in the press than play along with this game or this business of trading and to see my brother's office copy the very same thing that we promised the two of us we'd never ever do. That was heartbreaking. If this took place, it is unquestionably sad, but what's quite delusional here is that this entire Netflix series is no press office game playing. Rather, the accusations and intrusion of privacy is coming directly from Prince Harry himself, and with a $100 million paycheck. His actions are a far greater offence than that of which he accuses the Prince of Wales, who has never publicly said a negative word about his brother or sister-in-law, nor cashed in on them. Gosh. Thank you for that. Anna C. writes, what stuns me is the fact that this series was set to be released with the expectation that the late Queen would still be alive. The hurt and shock she would have been subjected to, not to mention the toll it would have taken on her fragile health had she still been with us, is unthinkable. After her passing, we know that Harry and Meghan edited heavily, which implies it was even more offensive to the royal family than its current state. Just how heartless are they to have even contemplated exposing our late monarch to it? Strong words there again. Rebecca, you have written about the stress that the whole Harry saga put on the Queen. What do you make of all of that?
I think that last comment was quite perceptive, because I think regardless of the many rights and wrongs about whether they're doing it, that is the thought that a lot of people have been left with, is that he filmed this, he did these video diaries, he conducted the interviews, all while his grandmother was alive, and presumably he, like the rest of us, didn't actually think she would pass away in September, so must have thought she would have been here to hear it. And personally, I find that incomprehensible, I have to say. And I've had this from several good sources, that the Queen, she loved Harry. She really missed him. She loved his kind of impish sense of humour. She loved his zest for life. She loved his, emotional connection with people. She genuinely missed him and loved him. But the whole acrimony of the situation left her very, very low at times during the last year or so of her life. It did affect her. She was left very upset by it. She would always put a brave face on it and would never upbraid him personally, because she wanted to keep that connection with her son, her grandson, and of course her great-grandchildren, her grandchildren, I should say. But it did leave her very low, and I think that's something Harry has going to have to come to terms with, I have to say. Gosh,
well, the palace has talked about moving forward, but how will they be doing that?
Well, in very much what I said to you before, they will listen to it. I mean, look, the King has not watched this programme. He doesn't really watch TV. I mean, he probably only just found out what Netflix is, quite frankly.
You're missing out, King Charles.
He doesn't have a mobile phone. The family, he writes to his family, they write to him. If someone wants to call him, they have to schedule a phone call with him. It's their own funny little way of working. He's a man who kind of still operates in a very different time. So I know he won't. I know he hasn't watched it, and I'm pretty sure he will never watch it. I know William hasn't watched it. Will he be able to resist dipping into it at some point?
You'd feel like, they must be getting text messages from all their friends.
Yeah, I think. Look, I know. For example, when that documentary with the kind of infamous Tom Bradby interview came out of them in South Africa, I know William watched that, because I was told that he watched it at the same time as everybody else did, with this kind of mounting sense of horror at what his brothers were saying, but in a way that he was very concerned for him. I think he didn't realise quite how emotionally vulnerable he was, and actually felt, I know, that Harry was quite manipulated into giving that. But I think that was slight ignorance at the time, and that actually Harry did want to say something, and it was his first opportunity to do so. So I can't believe William and Catherine won't dip in and out of it, to be honest. But their attitude is going to be, we are just not going to engage in it. We are going to move forward with our lives and our work. And I know one person earlier on this year said to me, I can't believe, given how close they were as brothers, that William would ever completely close that door on his brother. They've been through too much. And that they could see at a time in the future, but probably the very distant future, that there is some kind of rapprochement or some kind of dialogue starting between them again. But I think based on what we've seen over the last few weeks, and obviously what we've got to come, I think we are talking about the distant future for that.
Wow. Well, one thing the palace have tried to draw a line under is this awful race row involving Lady Susan Hussey. What can you tell us? And will she, as Richard Eden was tweeting about, get her job back?
I think she will. Obviously, when we say job, it's a voluntary position, it's not paid, you know. I think I've written once that actually the ladies in waiting, and obviously people who have these new roles, you know, they're only ever come from families that are basically rich enough to do a job they don't get paid for, basically.
Why do they do it?
There's a sense of duty, definitely, a sense of, you know, of honour that they're doing this for, you know, our sovereign. You know, and loyalty. And I think that's why Lady Susan stayed on after the Queen died, out of a sense of loyalty to the King. And also, I mean, I'm fascinated by the ladies in waiting because they know everything that goes on at the palace. And obviously that's a massive repository of information that the King and the Queen Consort can benefit from. But it's been a very painful experience, I think, for everybody around. This kind of whole incident blew up out of nowhere. And I know from people internally it's been a very delicate situation, but they've resolved it in a way that both parties are happy with. I think it was quite an elegant solution. I mean, even on the day that the meeting happened, I was told that we would get a joint statement, but probably not a picture. But actually, even then, the negotiations were going on that day as to whether that both ladies felt happy, because both have been through, you know, a pretty brutal experience in terms of the media, in terms of social media, in terms of, you know, family, friends, people on the streets, and that they both really want to draw a line under it and now move ahead. But obviously, it's been quite a salutary lesson for the palace as well, and they've admitted that. So, you know, they are going to look at their, you know, their internal procedures moving forwards as well. But yes, I think what's interesting, what was stressed to me, is Lady Susan didn't quit or resign. She stepped aside, and I think that phrase is quite telling, and I think that gives her room to step back in at some point in the future.
Watch this space. Now, another ongoing problem for the palace is, can you guess what I'm going to say? Prince Andrew. He's known.
It's like an unholy trinity of things. Oh my goodness! Isn't it?
It's like he's very attached to his security detail. We know this, and while it won't be police that he's getting, there's a very expensive solution on the table.
There is, and it's the one thing. I wouldn't go so far as to say I feel sorry for Prince Andrew, but there is an issue here. I mean, he's had two quite, you know, big security incidents in the last couple of years with people actually getting into into the home he lives with. So there clearly is a need for security there, but there clearly isn't a public appetite for us to pay for it. You know, he's no longer a working royal. But I suppose a bit like former Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers, you know, even when they don't hold the job, they still get the security that goes with it because there's an acknowledgement there is an ongoing security risk for them. So what we're told is that they've come to a solution that it will be paid for privately by the family. I presume from the King out of the Duchy of Lancaster, which is kind of his private pot of money. I'm only guessing, I don't know, because of course the Palace and the Metropolitan Police won't discuss security issues as a matter of course. But that's our understanding, and if he hasn't lost it already, I suspect it will be pretty early on in the new year. And of course, don't forget, he lives at Royal Lodge, which is already within that ring of steel that the Windsor estate benefits from. So, you know, there will be security for him in the future, but not what he was used to.
What do you imagine Andrew's doing with his days at the moment? Where does he go that would sort of like enable the need for security?
Well, I suppose the argument is the minute he steps out of Royal Lodge and out of the Windsor, Windsor estate, because he is so high profile. I mean, obviously we've seen I think a few weeks ago he had a trip to the Middle East, which was his first out the country for a bit. So he is out and about, and regardless of what's happened, he is entitled to go about his daily business and live his life. But there doesn't appear to be a lot in it, because it was so. As all the royal families, their lives are very structured by the public duty they do, and obviously he's had that structure taken away from him. I mean, you and I can probably think of a lot of things we like to do: shopping, get our nails done, hair done, whatever. I mean, I suppose for him, there's the kind of golf course at Windsor Estate, but it doesn't really fill your day, does it?
No, gosh. Anyway, let's contemplate that. Maybe you can, if anyone has any ideas on what Prince Andrew does all day, or what he could do going forward.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's been really a monumental year for royal news, obviously. What are your biggest memories? What are the things that you just won't forget from this year on a personal level?
I think, it has been quite the year. I mean, you think it was only at the beginning of this year that the whole Andrew, Virginia Roberts case was settled. I mean, that seems like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? I think one of the things that will stay with me forever, obviously, was covering the death of Queen Elizabeth. I mean, it's... I've never written a story before where I've had tears pouring down my face as I've been writing it, even though we all knew it was going to happen. And being at Westminster Hall when her coffin was brought in the kind of first, London-centric public part of the kind of final goodbye to her. I mean, I was probably within touching distance of the royal family, and seeing the grief on their faces and the grief on our faces as journalists and people of citizens of this country. I mean, that was, to have a ringside seat on history was really very special, and not something I will ever take for granted. And then I suppose on a kind of lighter note, back in June when we were in Rwanda with the then Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall, I did an exclusive interview with the Duchess to mark her 75th birthday. And I went to a hotel on the outskirts of Kigali, and I kind of walked in and she's sitting there and she went, hello Rebecca, got up, what do you want to have a drink? And we had a joke because she always drinks full fat Coke because she thinks, life is better if you do it full on rather than the diet variety.
I just really like the sound of Camilla's jib, I have to say.
Her attitude is do it properly but just in moderation. Do the full fat way but just don't have too much of it. And we were sitting there and chatting, and she was asked about my son, and we, before we got into the interview. And, it was just a lovely conversation with, a very nice lady. But I obviously, looking back on it now, not realising that within 3 months how much her life was going to change.
Yes. And
something like that would never happen again. And the kind of not knowing, in that kind of joking about whether you have Diet Coke or full fat Coke, that in 3 months' time she would be queen.
I think she's going to invite you to Buckingham Palace for a full fat Coke. I think that's going to happen.
I think those things, well, it hasn't happened yet. But I think it's very different now. It's a very different responsibility she had, and they have, people think, you must be desirable of the top job, but they've lost a lot of the freedom that they've had as well. And there's a lot of extra responsibility on a couple that are in their 70s that should be considering pottering around a garden, maybe highlight the days going off to the garden centre for a bit of lunch. They've got pretty onerous affairs of state to deal with at an age where most people are slowing down. So
it's
this classic gilded cage, isn't it?
But the last couple of months have obviously been about the new king getting his feet under the table. What do you think will be front of mind for his plans in the new year?
Well, funny you should say that, Jo, but I'm going to hopefully do a big piece about that next week in the Mail, so I won't give out too much away about what I think is going to happen. But obviously the coronation is the big thing, and plans for that are really apace now. Contrary to kind of suggestions that, this is going to be a cut price affair, it's not. But what they're going to do is kind of eke out some of the more, over-the-top elements of it, gold ingots, things like that. It's not going to be 6 hours, it's going to be 3 hours. But there'll still be a chance, the government said this week, to really showcase Great Britain PLC on the international stage, because there are certain things we do very well, and pomp and ceremony and pageantry that people enjoy watching is something that we do very well. So you've got that. We'll see his first state visit abroad. Can't say where to yet, but I think amongst the members of the royal family, there'll be a visit to your homeland on the cards as well.
Yeah.
Because they'll obviously want to visit the realms where, you know, there is still a British head of state there.
Well, the last time that the Queen and Prince Philip went to Australia, I got invited to Buckingham Palace for a party for Australians.
Did you go?
Yeah, of course I went. So yeah, so
what was it like?
It
Get
was
a little nose
absolutely
around?
wonderful.
Yeah.
I met Hugh Jackman.
Very jealous.
Yeah, thank you for that, Queen Elizabeth. Yeah,
I remember that. And Jason Donovan was there.
Oh, everyone was there.
Yeah. They open the doors to anyone, don't they,
Yeah,
Joe?
exactly. Yeah, on one Australian day.
Yeah. So you'll have state visit. You'll have his first state visit. You'll have big visits for the Prince of Wales and the Princess of Wales. But obviously everything will be leading up to the coronation. Oh, and I've been told that they will still keep those kind of hardy annuals. We'll see the garden parties and Royal Ascot and Garter Day. So you'll see everything that we've become familiar with under Queen Elizabeth II. But I think there's going to be some new stuff thrown in as well.
So the King will be busy, but you'll be busier by the sound of it.
Oh yeah, I mean,
thank you very much.
It's a joy, though. It's a It is such a joy to do this beat. It's so interesting. It's one of those things I never thought I'd be doing, and actually didn't want to do when I was asked. But you could see the journalistic intrigue in covering something like that, and it's been fascinating.
You are the right royal, Rebecca English, and we are so happy to have had you today. But that is all we have time for on Palace Confidential for you. We're off now to join Richard Eden on his Christmas break. He snuck off early. We'll have a special roundup show for you next week, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.